Hong Kong, a city that attracts the largest number of visitors in the world. It has been the economic capital of Asia for more than a century. That's also the reason why the city is home to the largest number of billionaires in Asia. Despite the wealth and affluence, Hong Kong has witnessed continuous protests and turmoil over the last few years. Why? Let's take a look at the unique history of Hong Kong in this video. In the beginning of the 19th century, the Chinese Empire was at its zenith. At that time, Hong Kong was also under the rule of Qing dynasty of China. China had great trade relations with the countries of the West, including Britain. The Chinese silk, porcelain, and tea were some of the Britain's favorites. Among these, the most traded good was tea. Most of China's trade with the West was through the harbour of Hong Kong. British expected the Chinese would buy their expensive clocks and watches that they produced in return for the tea that they bought from China. But the Chinese had little interest in the British goods. So, the Emperor of China asked the British to pay for the tea in silver. The British agreed to do this at first. But as the consumption of tea in Britain rose sharply, it put an enormous burden on Britain's treasury. To find a way out of this pinch, Britain started selling opium in China. As per the law of Britain, the cultivation and sale of opium was legal at that time. Most of this opium was produced from the poppy fields in Britain's colonies like India. This move helped Britain to offset the loss, but it had a big negative impact on China. Not only did it result in economic loss, millions of Chinese youth were becoming addicted to opium too. As a result, the Emperor of China ordered the seizure and destruction of opium. Tens of thousands of sacks of opium were thrown into the sea. Moreover, the Emperor banned the use of opium in China. This cut off the main source of income for Britain, and hence they tried to resist this move furiously. This resulted in two great wars between Britain and China, popularly known as the Opium Wars. Britain had far more technologically superior navy than China, and hence they easily defeated China in both the wars. Through this victory, Britain not only gained the right to sell opium in China, but also annexed the territory of Hong Kong. Britain's plan was to turn Hong Kong into an economic and military capital of Britain in that region. But they were also aware of the risk of being attacked any time, as Hong Kong was very close to China. So, Britain decided to sign a treaty with China to take Hong Kong and the nearby region of Kowloon for lease for a period of 99 years. Britain agreed to return Hong Kong and Kowloon back to China once the lease period was over. The next century had been an eventful one for China, as it went through significant changes. In 50 years, the monarchy in China ended and the People's Republic of China was founded by the Chinese Communist Party. Hong Kong, still under British rule, grew an economic hotspot by then. The West saw Hong Kong as the entry point to do trade in Asia. China was a closed economy even at that time. However, once Deng Xiaoping became the leader of Chinese Communist Party, this started to change. He realized that foreign investment and technology were the keys to achieve rapid economic development. He also understood the important role that Hong Kong played in this. Hong Kong's GDP at that time was 15% of that of China. The large corporations in Western countries including Britain and US figured out that while the large Chinese population meant the ability to manufacture goods at low cost, the population can also be a huge market for their products. Besides these, the West also wanted China to be in their side in the Cold War. All these factors led to the historic decision by Britain to return Hong Kong to China. Hence, Hong Kong was handed back to China after 99 years in 1997. On 1st July 1997, Hong Kong became part of China once again. But over the previous 100 years, Hong Kong had grown apart from China and had changed a lot. Hong Kong had followed more or less a democratic system of government until then. This was very different from what China had followed. At the time of handover, China had promised that it will not change the political system in Hong Kong for at least 50 years. China followed the promise in the first decade by maintaining the one country, two systems principle. However, by then, China underwent an unprecedented economic boom. If in 1984, Hong Kong's GDP was 15% of that of China, by 2018 it was just below 3%. Even the GDP of Shenzhen, another city in China, was more than that of Hong Kong. As China started turning into a superpower, it also gradually started changing its policies on Hong Kong. Since 1997, the de facto head of the Hong Kong government is its CEO, and that person has been decided by China. But it also turned out that even the Legislative Council was being controlled by the Chinese government. This is mainly due to the representation of industry in the Legislative Assembly. Elections are held only for the remaining seats. The industries, for their own sake, always vote in the favor of Chinese government. This means that even if the majority of the remaining representatives voted against it, the final decision will always favor China. The people of Hong Kong realized that the democracy promised to them was just a farce. Hong Kong's youth came forward against this flawed system. This became the first wave of protests in Hong Kong, known as the Umbrella Movements. The severe economic inequality that is prevalent in Hong Kong gave the protests further momentum. The living conditions of commoners in City of Billionaires is pathetic and miserable. While Hong Kong is 1/3 of the size of Goa, which is one of the smallest states in India, its population is 4 times as much. Majority of the people in Hong Kong cannot afford good housing. Most families live in small single-room houses with no place to move about, and they even have to spend most of their income on it. One reason for this is that the government is not willing to release the land that it holds in the outskirts of the city. The real estate auction held every year brings in millions of dollars to the government, which is also the main source of its income. The government fears that giving away land beyond a limit might lead to a collapse in the price of real estate. So, the government keeps the land prices high by controlling the supply of land. The common youth of Hong Kong are the ones who are affected by it most. Meanwhile, China tried to impose 2 new rules in Hong Kong. The first one was the Extradition Bill of 2019, which allowed offenders to be transferred to and tried in mainland China. China has a very strict legal system, which gives hefty punishments for even the smallest of crimes. The people of Hong Kong feared that they might not receive justice and might be treated unfairly under the Chinese legal system. This resulted in widespread protests and criticism from all around the world and was revoked the same year. The second rule is the national security law introduced by China in 2020. The intent of this law is to silence all voices of dissent and criticism. Similar rules are used in mainland China to crush and detain people who speak against it. This worried the youth in Hong Kong. However, this time the protests were all crushed by China. China even got this rule implemented by passing the Legislative Council of China. Hong Kong's history is very unique. The city was ruled by a colonial power for more than 150 years and finally became part of its parent country. But then, the majority of people in Hong Kong prefer to follow the value system and the idea of democracy that Britain exemplified. China proposed the one country, two system policy precisely because of this. But Hong Kong's experience proved that it is both impractical and impossible. It is that same fear that prevents Taiwan from uniting with China.